This is going to be the video that changes everything. If you don't want to know the truth about the IDAHO4 case and Bryan Kohberger, I suggest don't watch. If you want to know things that you never thought you would know, come with Pav. This one's going to be a journey. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the IDAHO4 case. And you know, when I was putting all this together yesterday and everything just became so clear to me, I didn't really know how to proceed with this, to be very frank, because you know what? I like it when I go through things and I investigate and I get things right. And I know I've gained a lot of people's trust out there with my investigation. So I've always got to bring the facts whenever I talk about this investigation into this case. And wherever those facts lead, they lead. So when I found what I found yesterday and I started to go through it all, I was quite astounded. And then by following the evidence, I mean, completely different evidence than what I actually put out in a short yesterday. And then I took that evidence and then I went to the 1112 video and I looked to see what I was expecting to see. And what I saw was not what I was expecting to see. And that's why I'll put out the video with, if y'all seen the short that I put out with the truck that's driving past King Road neighborhood that I said, is this Mawich's truck? Well, this is interesting. All right, you see here's a Mawich's truck here that I've superimposed over this. Here's in between the 1119 and Jack D's house. Back here is Walenta. Now watch this. Yep. You don't get a really good look at it, but yeah. You see the extended cab with the rear dark door, and there's the truck. Yep. I'm pretty sure that's it. Pretty sure that's it. Do y'all think law enforcement knows that that's it? And I wanted y'all's opinion on it. And I got a lot of comments, and the comments that I got range anywhere from, yeah, that's it, to, well, it could be it. You know, it's certainly closer to it than suspect vehicle. And I wanted to get that feedback before I actually put this video out. And in this video, I'm going to go through and, I mean, this is probably going to be a little bit longer than I normally do, but there's so much to cover. Because one of the things that I got wrong due to lack of information, and that's what's crazy about this thing is we get spoon-fed all of this information, but just piecemeal here and there, and you have to go through and pull it from so many different sources and then try to put it together. And then when you put it together, everything lines up just perfect to a certain scenario. And certain scenarios I was certain about. And then we get more documents unsealed, and the truth about certain things are unsealed. And then when you look at it again, you go, my goodness. So, with all that being said, forever, my theory on this case was that Bryan Kohberger was likely manipulated by individuals, likely manipulated and set up. That was my theory forever. Manipulated and set up. And there were reasons that I believed that. But then as we started to get this information and I looked at specific things around this case, I went, wait, there's no way. Because I had Bryan Kohberger using again, and law enforcement pulling him in as an easy target because he was using again. He was hanging out with these certain people. That's what I believed. But then as I started to dig and get more information, I said, wait a minute, Bryan Kohberger, there's no evidence he's even connected to these people in any way. I mean, they got his phone. They said he only had about 15 contacts, and the only people he ever talked to was his parents. So I said, wait a minute. Well, he's not talking to these people. He's not using again. He's staying up all night in his jail cell. I mean, he's just got, autism spectrum disorder. He's not using. And then I looked at certain things around this and I said, well, wait a minute. For example, they said Kohberger went back to the scene of the crime. Well, I said, well, wait a minute. He's at the ATM right here next to the neighborhood. And then he leaves the ATM and he drives past. That's why you see him on the camera at the Sunset Mart the next morning. And Kohberger never goes back into that neighborhood. We got the 1112 video. His car never pulls in that neighborhood. I've looked at every car that drove behind that neighborhood, and Kohberger's car never shows up. So I said, wait, this is just, they've brought him in. He didn't have anything to do with these people. They brought him in organically. Kohberger's just straight up an innocent factor in this thing. And that's what I believe because of the evidence that was put before us. Well, let me tell you, I was wrong on believing that. And I was right on my first assumption that Kohberger really does have connections with these people. Kohberger likely really was using again. Kohberger did go back to the area of the crime scene the next morning. I'm just going to tell you. And it wasn't to go to the ATM, I now know. So there's a lot of things that I've got to bring to you in this video that, I really didn't want to bring, because now we have to look at this case. This changes everything. We have to look at this case in a totally different way. And it doesn't change everything about every situation, but it does change a lot about the Kohberger situation. And it brings me a little bit more insight about my theory on Cy Ray that everybody thinks I'm crazy on. I have no idea. I do. I mean, I understand how easy it is to listen to what Cy Ray's saying and try to take it at face value because he seems very sincere. I am even more convinced than when I put the video out the other day about Cy Ray being a double agent for the defense. It's all one big ruse. He was working those Gonzalez family. He was working them.
I want him to get the appeal. I say, let's bring it on, get a new trial, but let's do it right. Let's get the right investigators involved, and let's go show the world just how depraved this guy was. Let's bring back the death penalty, make it happen. I worry that they don't do that and they fall back on this. Well, he's not going to get the appeal. We're not worried about it. Oh, crap. He made the first hurdle. He's not going to make the second hurdle. We're okay. We're okay. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in a position 5 or 6 years from now that there is a real possibility of a new trial, and they haven't done anything to patch the holes from the first round. And that's where I've been very vocal with anybody who will listen. The time is now to start this investigation over, to do it, just document it, get it done. It's not a crazy expense. I mean, we've done everything at our own expense. I probably have about 50,000 invested in my Kohberger nonsense at this point. Like, there's people like myself and other people and stuff that you guys are doing that you can do this the right way. I think it's all about getting a mental mindset of where this thing can go, being very real and truthful with the victims' families to explain, hey, here's a number of scenarios. And even if it's a 1% chance, it's something that we need to discuss. And hey, how do you combat this? If lightning strikes twice here, how do we make sure this guy never walks? Because that, at the end of the day, is the real goal here. This is why I've been so outspoken, is we can never allow somebody like this to walk, especially if we.
And now I have a pretty good idea why. Because if you listen to a little bit more in that video, I mean, it's clear to me. He is wanting all of that evidence that would prove Bryan Kohberger innocent. He's wanting that evidence. He's wanting them to team up with him and go get that evidence. And it's very clear. They think it's because he thinks that Bryan Kohberger is a serial killer.
The other thing I'm going to throw back to Steve that is just mind-numbing to me is there is a pattern of him looking at multiple houses. I believe he's a serial killer. I believe that was the intent here, was he was going to start his serial killer spree, if you will.
I assure you, there's no way. And if he did believe that, then Cyray's dumber than I thought he was. But we can be very certain, and you'll be very certain by the end of this video, that this isn't the case. All the people out there with the one-off Ted Bundy stuff, they're all morons. It's clear to me what Cy was really trying to get from them was the information that the FBI was never able to obtain, and that was the VICAP information. And remember, the VICAP, people think of it as the BAU for serial killer stuff. VICAP is going across multiple state lines for serial killer stuff, but also organized crime, to compare different things. VICAP is it's almost like a Palantir type system where they're able to put all that information in there to be able to determine things about victimology from families, right? We've already talked about Maddie's mom, Xana's mom, Maddie's dad and stepmom, Xana's mom, which I've got so much more on all of that. Oh my goodness. There's no doubt in my mind the two targets in this thing are Maddie and Xana. And it turns out Xana's mom, all of her stuff happens down in Nez Perce County. Yeah, Nez Perce County. And I've got so much more on that. But as we get into that, what he's trying to do is get that information about that VICAP for the Gonzalez family, because they would never get it. Listen to Steve in the background.
I'm going to go a little bit off script here too, and I could be wrong. And this is where I was asking about the VICAP report and all the questions to family and friends, which I can't find any reporting being done.
Never happened. Never happened. Never happened.
Never happened, right, Steve? Yeah, Steve knows what VICAP is as well. That's why he knows why it never happened. In my humble opinion, it's all just my opinion, but my opinion on things in this case, I believe, is very unique, because I believe I'm the only one that can actually put this together for you. And that's not me tooting my own horn. It's just because I'm the only one that has gone down this route in the investigation. I'm not stuck on frat boys and Jack D and all that nonsense. I'm not stuck on the undercover cops in the neighborhood doing little college buys. In my opinion, that has nothing to do with anything in this case. In fact, the more likelihood is those undercover cops were probably supposed to be doing what's called alternative measures, which is increased patrols and checking up on certain individuals that are supposed to be protected. Yeah, that's more than likely why you've seen all of those visits to the house for noise complaints when it didn't look like there was any noise. It's why you see the patrols around the house, because there was a couple of individuals, at least, if not more, that were in that house, and they were in that house together for a reason, and they were supposed to have eyes on them. Not like the real details that were on the parents, but it's called alternative measures. And that's where they outsource the local law enforcement agency in a situation like this just to increase patrols and keep an eye on these folks. And they failed miserably, it seems. But the reason that I say it's important for me to be able to look at this is because everybody else out there, because they have different views on things around this case, are going to look at everything that Cyray says in the wrong context. And they're not going to be able to apply it to the real reasons that things are happening around here. But Cy, and because he did this, it did enable me to go focus in on certain reports to be able to put this together. He brought up certain things around certain areas that are so key. In fact, he brought up 1, 2, 3 areas that are important to this case and a time frame that's important to this case. And then most people, when they hear like Steve mention certain things, they have no idea what he's talking about. I do. As soon as I hear him mention it, because I've studied all these reports, I know exactly what he's talking about. For instance, one of the statements Steve made had something to do with, I forgot what the way he said it, something about Kohberger's money, right? I'm sure people heard that and went, what's he talking about?
An interaction there that could have been the first crossing of paths. There's multiple times around the house that A&W over time, but consistently it's more with Maddie than the other roommates at that point.
He dips into his fantasy fund and Kaylee's up here. And it was like that's the moment he's going to plan this murder, and she's still down there and Kaylee's up here hanging out with us. So I totally agree.
And that was the first 2 big clues that Cy drops on us right there. And Steve G kind of helps out a little bit. But what he's talking about by his fantasy fund, here's what you got to understand. You have to go to the expert reports to find this. Analysis of spending habits, debit card purchases, and ATM withdrawals. The state intends to ask Special Agent Michael Douglas. And by the way, what does Michael Douglas specialize in? Since 2017, he's been employed by the FBI as a forensic accountant. He is primarily engaged in violent crime investigations, including investigations involving missing persons, child abductions, harassment, extortion, prison gangs, and organized crime drug enforcement task force. You see, Michael Douglas is part of the OCD ETF. And that's why he's brought in on this case. Prison gangs. They talk about spending habits, ATM withdrawals. And this is what shocked me when I first looked at it. And I haven't brought it up until this point because I wanted to look into it further. Now I have. And it says Douglas will state that Bryan Kohberger's Washington Trust bank account was opened on August 26, 2022 with a deposit of $50. But on August 30th, 2022, Douglas observed a $2,000.23 ACH deposit in the account. The account was inactive until November of 2022. On November 13th, 2022 and forward, Douglas observed 8 ATM withdrawals. Douglas will explain the first ATM withdrawal occurred at 10:49 a.m. on November 13th, which comports with the date of the unalivings in Moscow, Idaho. On that same date, Douglas can discuss images he reviewed of Bryan Kohberger in a white vehicle conducting this ATM transaction. Now, when this report was first unsealed and I first went through this, my eyeballs locked in really quick on this 10:49 a.m. And in my mind, I thought, well, maybe this is Boise time because I have Kohberger at the ATM and I couldn't remember the exact time at that point, but I knew Kohberger was at the ATM at Washington Trust Bank, I thought in Moscow, and that was his trip over there. And I didn't focus on it because other things were happening, but we're going to have to come back to this now because that was what I actually should have been waiting on this whole time. But it's important to note that on August 30th, Kohberger gets a $2,000 ACH deposit in the account. This is what Steve G's referring to as his fantasy fund. And he didn't start removing money from that account until November. It doesn't tell us the date that he started removing money from that account, but obviously the date in November where he started removing money from that account was the date that he knew that Kaylee was up there visiting them and she wasn't in town, which tells him that he knew that Kaylee wasn't going to be one of the targets. One of the targets that Cy Ray says is Maddie. Well, yeah, Maddie's definitely one of the targets. Xana was the other one, though. Nobody's acknowledging that at this point, but they will sooner or later. But there's a couple of keys right here. I don't know who put this $2,000 ACH deposit in Bryan Kohberger's account, but the fact that they did it on August 30th blew my freaking mind, because for those of you that have followed me, I've done 1,000 videos on Maddie's stepmom and dad, Xana's mom, and the date that everything happens in this case around their cases, going from they're about to go to prison to charges are all dismissed, all happen on August 30th. Actually, they all happen between the 26th and September 7th. There's just something that happens during that time period. And I might mention on August 31st is when Tyson Farley and Tanya Rhodes are arrested. Everything in this case, for my investigation, centers in on an August 30th date. But this is what they're talking about with that fantasy fund. And this is also what gave me the time period Kohberger hit the ATM, which threw me for a loop. And I'll explain that in detail here in a minute. But you've got to know the facts of this case to even listen to these conversations and know what they're talking about. Now, as you hear Cyree go through this interview, I'm going to point out some locations of interest that he focuses on that tell me everything I need to know because of what I've already put together. The first one is he talks about many times near the A&W root beer, near the A&W gas station.
I just want to go back for a second to something you said, Cy. So with the A&W, which is that gas station right down the road from the house. So you're saying you mapped his phone and also, was it the victim's phones?
And remember, it's like unscrambling some big giant code when you listen to Cyree talk. He's talking about the A&W gas station area being a point of interest, but he's telling them that Kohberger's phone's tracking with victims' phones. Well, we know that that didn't happen. So I take it as that is a area of interest that we need to focus on. But we know that he said in his report, law enforcement obtained 6 months of CDR data from all 4 deceased, as well as Mr. Kohberger. The enormous amount of data was requested to analyze for connections between Mr. Kohberger and any of the decedents. This is a best practice and absolutely was a required component of this investigation. However, documenting the analysis process as well as the findings of that analysis is also best practice and a required component of this investigation. The FBI final cast report falls well short of this requirement. Not only does it completely omit the lack of connections found, but there is also a concerning attempt to elicit connections that simply are not supported by the data, much like you hear Cyree doing in the interview there. But it does tell me that that area is a very much a point of interest, and that's why I go straight to the house across the street. Now, most people will focus in on that and they'll go, oh, it's Ethan's apartment, Zane and Ethan. Yeah, no. Near the A&W root beer is Braun. All right. This is going to be Braun. These areas of interest that he's focusing in on focuses in on the exact people I've been talking about this whole time. So you got Braun here in her house right here across the street from the A&W. Now he's going to talk about on August 28th, a specific time, August 28th, where Kohberger is at his apartments and he goes to the apartments across the street, or his phone does. And he's talking about it in a different context, but I know exactly what he's bringing up when he says that, because we all know the apartment across the street is Pimlico.
I believe Maddie was the target. I believe Maddie is who he interacted with earlier. There's some other things that kind of support that. I hope a lot of this comes out at some point. I think.
Sorry to know, but why do you say some things to support that? Is that the cell phones?
Yeah, there's a lot more collisions between Brian's phone and Maddie's phone than any of the other victims. And what I'm saying about collision is they start to occupy the same space at the same time.
Now, remember, as you're listening to Cy say this in his report, he says, I'm unable to locate any period of time between June 23rd, 2022 and November 13th, 2022. So this would include August 28th and all the other times at the A&W where Mr. Kohberger's mobile device is in the same specific area as any of the deceased's mobile devices. Any of the deceased mobile devices. He's never in the same specific area. So what he's talking about right here, because it certainly doesn't show up in any of the reports, is an event where Bryan Kohberger is going from his apartment over to the Pimlico apartments on August 28th. The part where Maddie is there and all this other stuff, I don't think that we could even take that into consideration as being possible based on this. And I don't think we can take them being at the A&W when Kohberger's there either as possible based on this. So it tells me that he's just letting out certain areas that Kohberger was at.
And there is a little bit more of a pattern to that than with the other victims.
And what do you mean, though? I know you don't have all the data in front of you, but like in different locations, or like
I want to say August 28th, but I could be wrong if that's a Sunday. The first Sunday after the full week of school starting in August, it's Maddie's phone that I think interjects with his phone in Pullman, and this is the apartment complex right next to Bryan's. And they start off at like the student center at WSU, and then they move up to an apartment complex. And I think there was an interaction there that could have been the first crossing of paths. There's multiple times around the house that A&W over time, but consistently it's more with Maddie than the other roommates at that point.
And we all know at that time in August, Kopacka lived in the Pimlico apartments. So Kohberger is literally going over to Kopacka's apartment, likely, according to what Cy Ray is laying out. The other area that he really wants to dive in on and get more information, he's working the G's to do it, is he said Kohberger spends a lot of time at different houses over on the northeast area of Moscow. The northeast area of Moscow. Well, guess what? The northeast area of Moscow just happens to be where both Molly McMichael and Tyson Farley lived at the time.
Type behavior, like just give us all the calls for service in these different areas and see, can we match up? Hey, he keeps going back to this other house on the northeastern side of Moscow. Oh, weird. The neighbor across the street has called in 3 times about a white car. Like, how does that change this investigation dramatically? And these are some of those things that I keep saying are just completely absent from this investigation.
And I don't have to remind anybody of this. We all remember this conversation with Bryan's neighbors and what they had told law enforcement about Bryan sitting on the stairs and leading up to his apartment next to a male. The male was described as having light brown skin, a sleeve tattoo on his left arm, wearing a sleeveless shirt and shorts. Said the male was riding a dark colored blue or black Harley type motorcycle. Said the motorcycle was not a sport bike and was very loud. Said he and the other person both noticed that Bryan and the male were talking, but said as they got closer, Bryan and the male stopped talking and looked at him. Said Bryan acknowledged them and asked how it was going and said it seemed as if Bryan was acting overly nice. They said when they walked away to their apartment, Bryan and the male were still silent, did not continue their conversation. Said he saw the male get up, heard the motorcycle start, but did not see him drive off. Said this was the only time they ever saw this person and or saw or heard the motorcycle. The last area of interest that he'll really focus on is in Clarkston by the Snake River. When you get into the area of Clarkston by the Snake River, this is when Kohberger's going to the grocery store, where he's going to Kate's Cup of Joe's. This is when he's talking about Kohberger actually going over and spending a little time at the river.
I can connect the dots there to have them see exactly what's happening. And right after he completes that route, he goes down to Lewiston, right down to the Snake River.
This area right here is a very interesting area for 2 reasons. One, at the time of the incident, it's exactly where Zagalo, Kopacka's girlfriend, lived. and the next street over is where Gerald Henderson's longtime boyfriend was living, a guy named Thompson. Very important to grasp that for what happened later in this case. Now, I know a lot of people at this point thinking, Pop, what you've turned coded on Kohberger. You're saying he's guilty based off of flimsy little evidence of what Cy Ray is saying. And I understand you feeling that way, but I can assure you it's the furthest from the truth. I just now know we have direct connections between Kohberger and the people who actually committed the crime, which gives them ample opportunity to set him up as the patsy, as well as manipulate somebody that's probably easily manipulated by these hardened criminals. But nothing that I've shown you so far is why I've come to this determination. What I'm about to show you next, where I had it wrong this whole time, and now I understand what truly happened and how I was actually organically led to the video that I put out yesterday on that truck. And I said, do you think this is Mawich's truck? Because I was so shocked when I actually took the real evidence in the case, did the analysis, went to that exact point in time expecting to see something else. And when I actually watched that truck drive by, I almost fell out of my chair. Okay. And it all comes down to Bryan Kohberger's trip to the neighborhood the next morning. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. So for those of you that have followed me, you know that based on all the evidence that I could pull together, I thought it was pretty cut and dry that in the probable cause affidavit, when it talked about further review of the 8458 phone, it utilized cellular resources on November 13th that are consistent with the phone leaving the area of Kohberger's residence at 9 a.m., traveling to Moscow. Specifically, it utilized cellular resources that would provide coverage to King Road between 9:12 and 9:21. The 8458 phone next utilized resources that are consistent with the phone traveling back to the area, the Kohberger residence, and arriving at approximately 9:32. So I knew that Kohberger had left his apartment roughly at 9, got to Moscow between 9:12 and 9:21, did something, and then went back to his apartment and got back at 9:32. And then through the self-authenticating records, I found out that on that morning, there were images of Kohberger at his car at the ATM at Washington Trust Bank. So I took that, and along with the video of Kohberger's car passing the Sunset Mart at 9:12, I said, well, it's pretty cut and dry. All Kohberger did was go to Moscow, go to the Washington Trust Bank, which is located right here. Here's the Washington Trust Bank, went to the ATM, and then headed down just a couple of blocks, and his car passes the Sunset Mart on camera right here at 9:12. 9:12 and 59 seconds. I said, it's cut and dry. All he had enough time to do was go to the ATM and then go back to his apartment. The only thing that I never really could reconcile was why was Kohberger driving this way, and he would have needed to be driving to the ATM to account for that 7 minutes. And that was the only thing that I couldn't figure out. I thought maybe we just circled back around and went to the ATM, but it more than, gave me the reason why Kohberger went to Moscow that next morning and wasn't going back to the crime scene. And then when I saw the report that I showed you earlier, that's why that time really made me go, what the heck? So after listening to Cy Ray in that interview talk about how Kohberger went back over the next morning and seeing this ATM withdrawal that occurred at 10:49 a.m. and not during the time frame that I thought it happened, I went, well, what is this? Did Kohberger go to the ATM twice? So it forced me to actually take the cast report and really break it down. And when I did that, I was floored at what I found. So when I go through the slides on the FBI's final cast report and look at all of the towers, it gives us the times that Kohberger actually was on those towers. And I know because I've studied the drive testing reports what the coverage area for each one of the towers and sectors are. It gives me the ability to be able to go through and actually, I believe, fairly accurately log exactly what the phone traveling actually does. And I mean, it gives you everything, every tower and sector, and every time that Kohberger, his phone actually connects to those towers and sectors. And then I'll take the other evidence that I have, like the time that they have the white vehicle on the Sunset Mart gas station that I just showed you. And I created my own map, took all of the data, and I'm able to actually go through and really understand exactly what happened at what time and what took place when, from when Kohberger came back that morning from, I believe, not from the crime. I believe from probably a meeting with the people that have set him up on this thing. But I can now do this. And this is what I did as I went through and put this together. This is what made me go, oh my God. But I know, just like the PCA said, Kohberger left his apartment around 9. How do they know that? Because they've got a hit on the tower and sector on this tower right here in this sector at 9 o'clock and 54 seconds. And you can pretty much determine, because earlier he was making phone calls and he was at his apartment, that he was at his apartment. So this is him leaving his apartment and heading south. And at 9 o'clock and 54 seconds, he pings off of this tower and sector. 3 minutes later, he pings off the tower and sector that's facing south. So at 9:03, Kohberger is either on 270 or maybe just south of it. And there's a 3-minute gap between here and here. 3 minutes would be just enough time to stop by the Coffee House Apartments. And I think that's why we're only seeing one glimpse of the vehicle at the Sunset Mart gas station. And I'll show you what I mean about that here in a minute, because I think if they showed the other camera views, you would actually see somebody else sitting in the passenger seat of Kohberger's car. So as he leaves there, he must have went across 270. So I don't know why they don't have any video of him going across 270, because his next tower that he actually hits is in Moscow. And it's this particular tower which provides coverage to the area right around the King Road residence, all the way across to where that Sunset Mart gas station is. And he is on this tower at 9:12 and 14 seconds, which puts him almost exactly at the right spot to where that white car that drives past the Sunset Mart at 9:12 and 59 seconds. I mean, so his phone and that video of that car, that is kind of lining up just perfect. But here's what got me, because I knew that his car was heading south because of the video at that gas station. The next thing I looked at was the fact that his phone then stopped connecting to that tower and sector and connected to the other tower and sector that did provide coverage to the King Road residence. Now, it's a big coverage area, but I know that his phone was heading south and then it headed west, because it then reconnected to the tower that it was on before it went to that tower. So there's only one way it could do that. If he was driving south, and we know he was because we see it on video, he had to go west, then back north, and then back east. And this is what I looked at, and I went, wait a minute, Kohberger is circle. He comes down and he has to go back up based on this and go around Walenta. But I knew that he never pulled into the neighborhood, because we've looked at all the video. His car never pulls in that neighborhood. So I thought, oh my, maybe we'll see Kohberger's car on the road on Walenta behind Jack D and 1119. We'll see it drive by. And I knew exactly what time to look. right at 9:21, because that's when he jumps from this tower right here back over to this tower. So I knew it'd be right at 9:21. And when I zoomed in on 9:21 at the vehicle, there's only 4 vehicles that drive by. 2 of them were white station wagons. One of them was a truck pulling a trailer, but the one that pulled by at the exact time that I expected to see Kohberger's car pull by was the one that I put out in the video yesterday. That's the only reason I found that truck and asked y'all if it was Mawich's, because I was looking for Kohberger's car to pull by and I didn't see it, but I sure saw what I thought was Mawich's truck.
Well, this
which
is
means
interesting.
that Kohberger, when he came down here at 9:12,
here's a
he
Mawich's
stopped
truck
somewhere,
here,
got out, got in
superimposed
Mawich's
over
truck
this
with his
is
phone still on,
in between,
and they drove right past the King
1119
Road
and Jack D's
neighborhood
house.
in Mawich's
Back here's
truck.
Walenta.
Now, Kohberger
watch
is a
this.
criminology student. He knows that if he's got his phone on and as he's doing this, he's putting himself right back at a crime scene. That's why I'm confident
Yeah.
that these guys are taking advantage of him. He didn't know what they were doing to him, or he would have had his phone off at this point. But the cast information, literally, there's only one way this works, is if he comes down based on the video at the sunset mark, goes south, he would have had to gone west, back north, and back east, literally circling Walenta.
With the
And then at
rear
the exact
dark
time I'm looking for him, I
door.
see what I believe is Mawich's
There's
truck.
the truck. Yep. I'm pretty sure that's it. Pretty sure that's it. Do y'all think law enforcement knows that that's it?
Which means that Kohberger, when he came down here at 9:12, he stopped somewhere, got out, got in Mawich's truck with his phone still on, and they drove right past the King Road neighborhood in Mawich's truck. Now, Kohberger is a criminology student. He knows that if he's got his phone on and as he's doing this, he's putting himself right back at a crime scene. That's why I'm confident that these guys are taking advantage of him. He didn't know what they were doing to him, or he would have had his phone off at this point. But the cast information, literally, there's only one way this works, is if he comes down based on the video at the sunset mark, goes south, he would have had to gone west, back north, and back east, literally circling Walenta. And then at the exact time I'm looking for him, I see what I believe is Mawich's truck. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what happened after 9:21 right here, because in Ray and Slavinsky's reports, they actually skip the FBI cast slide that would explain what happened between 9:21 and 10:03 a.m. They actually leave that slide out of the report. So, of course, I'm in the dark now. I don't know what happened after 9:21, but I do know that starting at 10:03, Kohberger's back at his apartment, and that's when he's going through and making phone calls to his parents. He takes the selfie pic at 10:31, and then at that point is when he goes to the ATM. And where I got it wrong this whole time is when he went to the ATM and which ATM he went to. So the ATM that he actually went to was the Washington Trust Bank in Pullman, and he did it at 10:49, not at 9:12. Now I've got all of the docs. So this is the ATM for Washington Trust Bank in Pullman, and they have a picture of him at this ATM at 10:49, and you can see here's his apartment would have been up here. As he comes down going south, down here by Bishop is Washington Trust Bank right here. This is where they get the picture of him, and I can now say that 100% because of the cast report. And the cast report will show him down here at 10:49. Actually, it shows him on this tower in sector at 10:45 right here. which means he comes down. He's right here at 10:45. 4 minutes later, he's at the ATM actually in Pullman at 10:49 making a withdrawal. And that was the first withdrawal, or not the first withdrawal, but that was a withdrawal that he made out of the account that he got $2,000 put in back on August 28th that the OCD ETF Michael Douglas said that he didn't start using until November. And it doesn't stop there. From there, I'll be able to really connect Kohberger and Mowich with what happens next, as well as all the other things I've talked about in this video. But that's a lot for this one. Now, I know that's throwing a lot on you, and I know there's probably a lot of thoughts out there, but I just think it's always going to be the best for us to look at the evidence objectively and then take everything into context. One of the main things that steered me away from believing that Kohberger would even know these people was the fact that I thought he went to the ATM that morning. Everything lined up perfect to him going to the ATM in Moscow until I got that report and I realized that didn't happen, which means he went to Moscow for some other reason. And it was a quick trip, 30 minutes. So, I mean, you don't do that for no reason. Now, you can come up with all kinds of reasons that are not nefarious whatsoever. But the facts are that he went there. He was in the perfect area to get in the truck with Mowich. And then based on his phone records of the path that he took in his phone, Mowich's truck drives by at the exact, down to the second, the exact time, which tells me Kohberger was in the truck with him. But it doesn't stop there. I continued on with the cast report, and I know what happened after he left the ATM the next morning. And I'm going to go through that with y'all in the next video. Kohberger absolutely went down probably with Mowich. I'd love to see those pictures of the ATM to see who's in there with him. But anyway, he most certainly goes down to several locations that are quite apparent to me. And it's had to have been apparent to law enforcement this whole time as well. So the person that's hidden behind this thing that everybody wants to uncover, they call the accomplice. Well, it's going to come out. Now, there's no doubt in my mind. It has to come out now. And it's always been Mowich. It looks to me like it's Kopaka as well. And I believe I've had this thing nailed this whole time. I just didn't realize that Kohberger actually knew these people and that they must have been taking advantage of him. Kohberger made 10 withdrawals from that account, cash withdrawals, from November 13th, 2022 until he left to go with his father back to Pennsylvania, a month later. And I've got all of the Walmart and Target purchases that he made during that same time period, and he made several. So he wasn't making withdrawals for cash to go to Walmart and Target. It tells me that if he's making 10 cash withdrawals, Kohberger was definitely, in my humble opinion, using substances. And I can't think of any other reason to make those cash withdrawals other than to do that based on his nightly driving habits, the people that he's associating with. So there's a lot of things that are starting to come into focus now. And there's some other things that are kind of blowing my mind that I'm not even going to cover, that's leading me to think some things that are really shocking. But I believe we got to look at things the right way. If Kohberger was associated with these people, he's going to be the perfect person for them to set up. Now, in this process, two of them have been unalived. It looks to me like, though, now as we get into the information about the hair in Ethan's hand, well, I'm more and more convinced that hair is going to come back to Ms. Braun. More and more convinced. So how much of all this is going to come out in the trial, I have no idea. But I think if we focus on the facts, we get this out into the public sphere so that people have the right conversations, we can make it all come out. Let me know your thoughts. And believe me, I've got a ton more I'm going to go over with you in this same area. And by the time I get through all this, you'll know that Pop isn't just whistling Dixie. But please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pop's out.